Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the big question in Harrisburg these days is, what? Should Governor Corbett not seek a second term? And then is the new Attorney General Kathleen Kane playing politics in the Attorney General's office? All of that follows these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, I'll tell you, the big question in Harrisburg these days concerns that there's a big debate going on. Should Governor Corbett seek a second term? I have a trio of the state's leading journalists. We're going to work through that. We're going to talk a little bit about Kathleen Kane and a big decision she made about the state's version of the Defense of Marriage Act. Joining me, as often is the case, is Brad Bumsted. He's with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, Robert Vickers with the Harrisburg Patriot News and PennLIVE. And over here on my right, that's just figuratively speaking, is Eric Boehm with the Pennsylvania Independent. All right, Robert Vickers, I'm going to start with you. Robert, you've written about this. Almost everybody in the press corps has written about this. All of a sudden, there's a huge debate going on, and it bubbled over. I mean, it was sort of quiet, and now, what are the arguments? Let's talk about the position that Governor Corbett finds himself in that brings us to the point where we're having this discussion not just here, but in many quarters around the state.
Well, the Governor, Tom Corbett, has had miserable poll ratings pretty much through his entire term. He's had a series of foot and mouth gaffes that have incidentally ticked off the emerging voting bloc of women, single women, Latin voters, and young people. And he went out and campaigned vigorously all over the state for his big three agenda: liquor privatization, transportation, and pension reform, and went 0 for 3. And immediately after that, even really during the process of the last budget cycle, speculation had started developing as to whether or not his presence on the ticket would be damaging for other Republicans around the state next year.
Eric, the real problem, it seems to me, as a longtime observer, is that there's no logical successor. I mean, you know, at least someone to come onto the scene, and then doesn't it look like, well, we failed for 4 years? I mean, go ahead.
And there's certainly a movement within the Republican Party of the state to try and sort of figure out if there could be somebody else there. There's no obvious successor, and from what I've heard is that there's no one who's going to step up unless Corbett steps aside, that he would have to make the first move. He would have to say, I'm not going to run for another term, you know, to paraphrase LBJ, I will not seek or will I accept the nomination of my party. Yeah. He would have to do that. Then they start looking at, you know, Senator Pat Toomey's name has been batted around a little bit. A few congressmen's names have been batted around, but Corbett is really the one who has to make the decision.
You know, you've also written a lot about this, so you've covered a number of governor's elections. I mean, the fact is that there's no logical successor. Do you agree with that?
That's correct. No
logical successor. And in some respects, you can look at the Republicans that control the legislature, as Robert points out on this big three agenda items, that they couldn't, the House and the Senate.
Right, they're culpable too. But I think the whole thing is absurd, to be honest with you. It's understandable why people think Corbett should step aside, but governors don't do that. But number one, the way things are in politics today is not where they'll be 15 months from now. And we don't know who the Democratic opponent is going to be. Right. And that makes all the difference in the world, depending on the weaknesses of that opponent, that all of a sudden maybe it looks closer. But he is in trouble. He is vulnerable. There's no doubt about it. I think that the Republican leaders in the legislature have to sit down and say, would we rather have Tom Corbett as governor or Allison Schwartz, let's say? Yeah. Makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the lack of a logical successor matters, but I'm back to this point that you've got these deep divisions in the legislature, you know, particularly in the House of Representatives, without getting into the weeds too much, but Republicans aren't on the same page in the House about what they should do, particularly on roads and bridges, which not arguably Democrats and Republicans support. Labor unions and business are all on the same page on roads and bridges, but yet you can't get an important roads and bridges bill out of the House. Over in the Senate, you can't get a liquor privatization bill. So what's the dimensions of that matters?
Well, like I say, in Washington, anybody can get elected to the House. And a lot of these figures that are in the House here in the state legislature still have a bit of awe for the office of the governor. So I think he has a bit more clout in the House than he does in the Senate.
You think he's used it?
Not particularly effectively, and that's one of the problems.
Yeah.
And the thing that stuns me is that figures in his own party who've lamented his lack of political acumen from the day he's walked in the door are too timid to sort of approach him and say, you know, for the good of the party, step aside. People will say that they're afraid of the $20 million campaign fund that he's going to raise 20 to 40, some might even say. But if I can paraphrase something real quickly, you can put $20 million of lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
All right, when we come back, we're going to get into Kathleen Kane and is she playing politics with Attorney General, but I want to ask Eric his business about the money and where all that goes. We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back with a trio of the state's leading journalists. They cover the Capitol, they cover politics in the state. I'm going to turn to Eric here. Eric, this whole business of money, Governor Rendell raised, I think, something like $43 million the first time. No one has even come close to that. Over $70 million in his two runs. How important is money? Can Corbett raise $20 million? He seems. Go ahead.
Yeah, money is a big part of obviously winning a gubernatorial election. Corbett is going to raise the preliminary numbers seem to be somewhere in the $20 to $30 million range, as Robert pointed out. And he's got some big backers, even some big Democratic backers like David Cohen of Comcast, who has come out and supported him. The campaign in the fall of next year, when it gets down to being Corbett versus whoever the Democratic nominee is going to be. I mean, he's going to have all the money he needs to make it a real air war and to bomb the heck out of whoever the opponent is. Now, it's going to be a very nasty campaign, I think.
I think you would all agree we're not. It is going to make a difference. It always does, Brad Bumsted, in politics, who the opposing candidate is. Now, not arguably, again, you've covered a lot of these. The out party doesn't hold the governorship, has to run around and beg someone to run. This year, you have kind of a first-term field, meaning, election to a first term with I'll call it a reasonably strong field of likely Democratic candidates. What's your sense about that?
Well, there are 6 declared candidates, and there are about 4 others possibly. But the leading candidate is, supposedly is Congressman Allison Schwartz from Montgomery County. But there are other substantial players in this, including York businessman Tom Wolf, former DEP secretaries Katie McGinty,
2 of them.
Right? And
That's
John
a history-making event right there.
And there are some big names out there within the Democratic Party. But what happens in party primaries is the Democratic primary tends to nominate liberal candidates. So it's okay to be, they all want to be liberal, but then when they come out of that gate for the general election, they may be too liberal for the rest of the state. So that's a problem.
Robert, I've just looking at these, at the backgrounds of the candidates, and I'll generalize, you correct me if I'm wrong. I can't find much difference in them in terms of the issues.
I don't think
they're all
find
social.
it.
Well, what's the campaign going to be like? Are they going to all agree?
This is one of the reasons why a lot of people suspect that the primary is going to be very nasty. And the Democratic Party chairman yesterday in a conference call with a bunch of us denied that.
Yeah.
But every indication is that once the campaign really kicks off, that the mud will fly and all kinds of attacks are going to come out.
The primary will be about Corbett.
Go ahead.
I think the primary will be about Corbett.
It'll be about, but don't candidates in a primary have to, Robert's right, they have to distinguish themselves from each other, and Can they do it on
and
the
to Robert's
issues?
point about the Democratic leadership, the party leadership has been pretty clear for a year or more now that they wanted to have just one kind of anointed, appointed candidate. They didn't get that, and now it doesn't look like they're going to have any way to clear the field because there's really no candidate that is superior at this point to all the rest in terms of fundraising or in terms of popularity. So it's going to be a nasty campaign, and I think that is Corbett's opportunity here. If he has a chance at winning re-election, it's that the Democrats are going to beat each other up so much in the primary.
The interesting thing for me, though, is that the Democratic Party, this Pennsylvania Democratic Party, has been running effectively a surrogate campaign against Corbett in lieu of the candidates that are going to be running against him. And I wondered yesterday if that's intended to sort of paper over this coming nasty fight.
Well, we're going to have all the Democratic, we're inviting all the declared, as Brad pointed out, declared candidates to come on the program. We had John Hanger, and as far as he would go was to say that he has detailed positions on his website. And none of the other candidates have put them out yet, but do you want to say, we're still a long way off, and I mean, obviously they're going to get pinned down as to what they stand for, and maybe we'll find some significant differences when that happens.
Maybe we will, but I still think it's going to be, they'll clash over little issues, blow them up. It'll be about Corbett to a certain extent. But this idea that if they have a nasty primary that's going to be harmful, I'm not so sure about that anymore. If you look what happened between Rendell and Bobby Casey,
that's pretty brutal.
That was very brutal, and Rendell came out of that very strong. And Mike Fisher hadn't had a primary opponent. So.
All right, we're going to run to a break. I'm going to ask this question. In addition to talking about Kathleen Kane and whether she's playing politics in the AG's office, will she be a candidate for governor in 2014? We'll ask the reporters after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back with Robert Vickers, Brad Bumsted, and Eric Boehm, three of the state's leading reporters. We're chatting about a whole bunch of important things. All right, Kathleen Kane, her star for an elected official in this state is about as high as one star can get. And she's made a couple of very controversial decisions in the last couple of weeks. Is there any chance the party turns to her and convinces these folks not to run? The candidates that you all have been talking about?
Yeah. To your first point, I mean, she received more votes in the state than anybody else last November, even more votes than President Barack Obama did in Pennsylvania. So,
and Bob Casey.
And Bob Casey. So she certainly had a mandate from the voters. She's run with it. She has certainly put her stamp on the lottery privatization debate. She's put her stamp on the gay marriage debate now in Pennsylvania. As you mentioned, her star is as high as it can be. I don't know. I'm curious to see what you guys think. I don't think she's ready to run for governor in 2014. I don't think she's had the experience yet to compete with some of the more experienced candidates that are in the slate. I think down the road she becomes a very viable option.
I think she's go ahead.
Needs a little
well,
more
there's
time.
no question down the road that she's going to run for governor. But this time, the advantage to her is this weak Republican incumbent. We'll never see a situation quite like this where, I mean, some of your polls have shown Corbett as low as any governor in recent history. So that has to be part of it. I'm not saying I think she's going to run, but the scenario is she's got this weak opponent and her star is high. And as far as the details on issues, no, I don't think she's ready in that sense. But you could argue that she wasn't for Attorney General either, and ran a TV war, campaign.
And it was
great ads.
Yeah. Does she run? I'll ask you.
I don't think so.
So we got three no's.
During the debate, when she was running for the office, she promised that she would, I forget the exact language, either finish out her term or not seek another office. Finish her
Finish your term.
And
now that would be a
hard.
surprise if somebody didn't keep their their pledge on that, right?
Well, Terry, how many candidates have you known who said,
Yeah.
I'm not going to run for another
All
office,
right.
and then they do?
Well, Brad, look, let's turn to this other issue. I mean, there's a huge debate going on now. Forget the issue itself, a gay marriage. I've done polls, others have done polls. In my humble judgment, a majority of the voters support gay marriage. I think ultimately the Supreme Court will rule that gay marriage is a right, and it'll be done. It may not be this year or next year. That's maybe you disagree. You can disagree with me if you want. We're not getting into our own positions on it. That doesn't matter. But her decision to not support and defend the 96
Correct.
State statute that defines marriage between a man and a woman is hugely controversial. What say you?
Well, the fact that the Attorney General would say that she says it's unconstitutional so she can't defend it, to me, is troublesome, regardless of your stance on the issue. For her to do that and then say, well, I'm going to delegate this to the governor's office. Well, Pennsylvania voters in 1978, I guess it was, approved the Office of Attorney General to have an independent office separate from the governor. And here she's saying she's determining that something's unconstitutional. I thought that was for judges to do.
Yeah. What your thoughts?
Yeah, I pretty much agree exactly with Brad. I think you start to run a risk of where does the rule of law exist if politicians, any elected politicians, can just say we're going to choose not to enforce or not to do a certain part of our job that we were elected to do. She can disagree with it personally. She can say she disagrees with it personally. Yeah. She can assign an attorney to the case who is not going to do a great job,
recuse herself.
And that's fine. She can recuse herself from it. But I think her making the decision, as Brad said, to rule it unconstitutional, that's stepping on the judges.
Yeah, one interesting aspect of this is their office, Robert, is defending the voter ID law, which I can't believe she supports. Right. So it looks like she's supporting, now maybe she inherited that, a little different, that was already in various courts. Maybe she felt she couldn't, but does that mean she supports, and I've never heard her speak to this, maybe you guys have, to say whether she thinks that's constitutional or not. But moving beyond, if you want to comment on that, you can. We still have something else to go. The results of the Jerry Sandusky investigation. Well,
it's interesting to me that when she came into office, she seemed to be a bit shy about going after the governor, but it now seems like she's enjoying it a bit. But she did curiously decide to continue on representing the voter ID case for the state, which is a big Democratic issue across the country.
Absolutely.
So that is a sort of a curious thing. But relative to gay marriage in particular, I think it's yet another situation where the electorate is a few steps ahead of the elected officials.
And she wanted, go ahead, we're going to run to a break.
One difference is there isn't an issue of constitutionality with the voter ID law. The Supreme Court didn't raise it in its opinion, and the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld Indiana's voter ID law, which Pennsylvania's law is patterned. So it's not the same as the Defense of Marriage Act.
Maybe I'm wrong. I thought, but the issue is whether you're depriving people of a voting right, which does have a constitutional implication. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I think Brad's right. I think it's the constitutional issue is probably where she's drawing that distinction there. But I think bringing it back around to the campaign point that we started talking about, I think she actually serves a better purpose for the Democrats in her current role, where she can continue to be a thorn in Corbett's side while these other candidates figure out what their campaign is going to be.
That's a good point. All right, I want to continue this discussion. Then we have one other big topic we're going to take up. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back. Well, we're chatting about a number of important topics, and one of them that has been alluded to, but we have not talked about, is, Robert, the return of the legislature this fall and the prospects that Governor Corbett can get maybe one of his three big agenda items. So I'm going to ask you all this. Which one, if they do it, if they accomplish it, do you think they're likely to pay? It's really putting you on the spot. You wouldn't expect anything else, would you?
No.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say transportation, but I'm going to change mine to whatever Brad says.
Transportation.
Well, I think he gets one because of the issue of survival. If Corbett's poll numbers are as bad as that we think they are,
don't they have to?
The Senate could lose, the Republicans could lose control.
Yeah.
They could see a crash and burn scenario. So I think he'll get something, and
You know what it
transportation is the
Both
bill.
of you think transportation?
Well, it just has bipartisan support.
I would say transportation. I'll also throw out a thing maybe for pensions. I'll say it's one or the other. Both of those have sort of a continual pressure on them. There's the roads and bridges are going to fall down point. There's the pension is going to bankrupt the state point. Liquor, I think, is off the table probably
what
until
about
after the next election.
what about
pensions light, maybe?
Pensions light,
pensions?
sure.
But what about the tax implications, the wholesale gasoline tax, and that some lawmakers have taken the so-called the Grover Norquist pledge? No, and there's is that problematic? What?
It's a huge problem. I mean, you got a group of conservatives in the House Republican caucus who want no part of it, see it as a huge gas tax increase.
Yeah.
And somehow you have to come up with another way to raise more revenues.
But in newspapers I've been reading now, weight restrictions on bridges. You start picking up newspapers and you read weight restrictions on bridges. Where does that go?
And that's what I mean by there being kind of a constant sort of a toothache kind of pressure on the legislature with that on the transportation issue. That's why they need pressure on them to get anything done, and there's at least a little bit of pressure on that issue.
The interesting thing to me, though, is that the only people that seem optimistic about any of the big three agenda items are people that have a dog in the fight. The people that don't have a vested interest all think none of those are going to pick up any momentum.
Go ahead, Brad.
I think that Leader Mike Turzai might have a problem with doing this, but there's no doubt in my mind that if a transportation bill came up in the House, you'd have Democratic votes and enough Republicans from the Southeast to pass it. It's a question whether leaders agree to bring it.
And if they go back, maybe not to square one, but they go back a few
Yeah, yeah.
steps and
Ratchet it
negotiate
back.
with Germany and talk to some of the Democrats,
Yeah.
bring some of them
Well,
on board, they can get around those conservatives.
Yes.
Yeah, let me see if I can summarize this. Of all the issues that we're talking about, transportation seems to have bipartisan support.
Mostly.
Mostly.
No, it
It
does.
passed the Senate
It's
40
overwhelming in the Senate, yes.
It passed the Senate 45 to 5.
Depending on
not
the
the House.
components, depending on the components of the bill, it has bipartisan support. If you
All
have
right.
a prevailing wage in there, it doesn't.
If Governor Corbett gets one or more of these, is it a big help, a little help, no help?
He'll claim responsibility for them, but I think it'll be difficult to come back from what's happened.
I think it's a wash because on one hand it gives him a victory which he needs, but on the other hand people are going to be paying higher prices at the pumps or whatever, so you can't be that happy about it as a taxpayer.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit better than a wash. I think it's a net gain for him just because he is able to push back a little bit against this drumbeat of not being able to get anything accomplished for 3 years. And I think that means a lot going into the election.
All right, so as we end this show, Kathleen Kane not likely to run, but can be hugely important to Democrats in the campaign. You agree there, right?
Not likely.
Not likely to run. I know Brad is he's a little hesitant over there.
5% maybe.
5%. All right, thanks. A great update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.